my principles have always been the same, from each according to their means to each according to their needs. And every member matters. And what I've tried to do is maintain contacts with members. I have a mailing list of several thousands that I mail directly. While I've been supported by different groups from time to time, I'm not in the gift of any faction. On every issue, I consult members if I've got time. I listen to the arguments on both sides, and I decide according to their merit. And if I'm re-elected, that is what I will continue to do.
Be in no doubt, we are going to get Britain building again. We are going to get Britain's economy growing again. And there is no time to waste.
Together, let us fight for a better future once again. Change begins now.
Whoever I meet, I see a team of people that are ready and willing to put their shoulder to the wheel to get it done, and their government is already at work putting our shoulders to the wheel too.
But have no doubt that the work of change begins immediately. Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain.
Hello and welcome to We Are Labour. This is a podcast all for Labour Party members, activists, supporters, voters, and it's also for MPs, MSPs, peers, councillors, the whole Labour family. Here is where we discuss the issues inside the party, as well as the messages of hope we need to get out there, because I believe personally the Labour Party is the best engine for social justice and change in the world. And so today is a very particular episode. Maybe a bit more controversial than something I've done previously. Today's guest, in fact, is Anne Black from the NEC. She doesn't really require much of an introduction. She's been, of course, in the NEC for decades and decades, apart from a brief stint when she wasn't. And also David Langdon Cole, a councillor in Huntingdon, in the town council there. And David wrote an article reflecting on the general election that just passed, and then shared that piece, and it was a little bit of a critique, shall we say, of some elements of the election. Now, this is a bit of a controversial episode, and I did say in the episode I have a slight disagreement with them, because for me personally, an election victory is an election victory, and I don't really mind how we got there as long as we get there, because it's about change, and that only happens from taking power. But they were saying some things about how the party could reflect on maybe some of the things that happened, which I think there might be some valid points there. But also David in particular talks about the next election and making sure that we are ready for the next election as well, based on the one we've just had. It was a particularly interesting episode, and I hope you enjoy it too. And if you could share this with somebody else, that would be fantastic. And the most important thing to do, of course, is to rate and review this podcast. It's now on YouTube. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I don't want to tell you that because you're watching it or listening to it right now. But somebody else who doesn't have access to one of those might have one of the others. So if you're watching this, hello. If you're listening, hi. And leave a review and comment, etc. It really helps. Subscribe to the channel or subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it on your players. Right, I'll hand over now to Anne Black and Councillor David Landon Cole. Well, I'm absolutely delighted now to be welcomed on the show by two guests. I think it's the first time I've had two guests come on at the same time. That is Anne Black from the NEC and David Landon Cole. I'll just tell you a bit about them before I say hello to them. So Anne Black is a member of the Labour NEC. She's standing once again in the current internal party election. She's received 214 CLP nominations, which is the highest number of nominations for a candidate in this election. Hello, Anne. Welcome to the show. And also we have David Langdon Cole. He is a Labour town councillor in Huntingdon, and he was the mayor of Huntingdon a few years ago. And it's because of David we're having this podcast, because he wrote an article which we'll be reflecting on in this episode. Welcome to the show, David.
Hello.
Great to have you here. I actually listened to your podcast on a Friday morning. Buses, politics.
Coffee, buses and politics.
That's the way round. Yeah, although I'm a tea drinker, but I don't hold that against you. And if you haven't heard that, everyone, check it out. It's on Facebook, Twitter. Follow David on Twitter. You'll find it there, right?
Oh, I've actually nuked my Twitter because I got fed up with it. But next week we're going to be starting our own Twitter feeds. But if you look for Alex Bulat on Twitter or Facebook or anything else, you'll find a show at 7:30 on a Friday morning.
Great. And she actually came onto this show as well, so you can actually listen to her episode there. So let's just start then, because David wrote an article after the general election, and I know that then Anne found this and was talking about it as well. And I thought that would be a really interesting debate to have about this article you wrote. So, David, do you want to tell us about your article? What's it called, and what was it that you were describing and discussing in that piece that you wrote?
So the article, actually, something that wasn't quite right there. You said I wrote the article after the election. I was writing it during the election. This was notes I was cobbling together as I was going through, and I turned it into something afterwards because it was something that was sort of bothering me as we were going along. The article was called "Labour's Targeting Was Too Ruthless." Friend of mine, James O'Malley, a lot of people know him as Scythor on Twitter as a freelance journalist, and he kindly let me put it on his Substack. The basic argument I make is that the strategy we had, the strategy of targeting and going for that very efficient voter coalition, was the correct one. The proof being we are now in government. Now, I don't like the voting system we've got. I want a different electoral system. But while we have this electoral system, it's what we need to do. But I think there are a few problems with it. So one is your data is never that good. And you never have, in the social sciences, you never have the quality of data that you want. And so I think they sort of over-keyed in on targets. And so there were places that were conceivably could have got over the line that weren't given any support. Now, the example I gave was Sam Carling in northwest Cambridgeshire. You get flukes like that, but there are also places where you could, a little bit of support could have made the difference. I think a second part of it is you can't instruct party members what to do. Firstly, you shouldn't, but secondly, you can't. There was a particular thing that my twin seat was changed from Peterborough, which I can get to on the train in 12 minutes, I don't drive, to Kettering. For me to get to Kettering by public transport is 2.5 hours. I didn't go to Kettering. You know, pick up the phone and ask. But there were a series of things. I also felt, I'm afraid, that a lot of the candidates were treated really pretty shabbily. A particular thing was that, for at least for Huntingdon CLP, where I am, I told 2 people who applied that they hadn't been successful, and there particular issues around that. I think another thing is that this was a missed opportunity. Winning the general election comes first, absolutely. Clause 1 of the Labour Party, but it's not absolutely everything, and particularly not because we have mayorals now. We have metro mayors. Next year, Dr. Nick Johnson is up in Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. You mentioned earlier on the podcast, coffee, buses and politics. I spend a lot of time on buses. It's something that really matters to me. We're now getting a really improved bus system coming in Cambridgeshire. So winning this election is really, really important. So there's a missed opportunity there. But also the voting coalition for next time will not be the same as this time. And I've got particular concerns as well about how the far right have grown in places before. Now, I'm aware that Morgan McSweeney from Barking, and so probably knows vastly more about it than I do. But one of the things that let the far right come in was the belief, you know, whether it's true or not, that the political parties had withdrawn. So that's an issue. There's also the particular thing that I mentioned earlier, lack of support. I'm afraid in some cases, lack of support was active hampering. So contact creator being cut off. The result was we still went campaigning. We just did things in a much more bureaucratic way. We couldn't get leaflets printed through Labour Connects. You know, ridiculous things like that. We do know how to call a printer. That is something we can do. We can pick up the phone. It just cost us more money. But also the effect on upsetting activists was real. So I think going forward, the bit I end with is be nicer, make sure twinning goes both ways, so that outside of general elections, there's support going to those CLPs that aren't as robust, perhaps, and then agree a set of procedures for elections and stick to them. And I almost don't care what the procedures are. Just tell me what they are. I've previously been a secretary, procedure secretary, all of that. I can handle almost any system, but I do work full time, and I've got other bits as well. I need to calendar things in. So that basically is the article. I'm indescribably happy that we've won. The thing is, I worry that we've won this election at the cost of the next one.
Wow, strong words there. And Anne, can I just bring you into this as well? Because, of course, you saw this article, you then tweeted about it, didn't you? So do you want to just share your point of view as well?
Yes, I mean, the reason why I liked it and the reason why I've actually shared it with my entire mailing list is that it struck me as very balanced in that it agrees absolutely on the need for a strategy of targeting. Always get a fair number of people who think they're going to win seats where they've only ever got 2,000 votes, and if they only knock on every door, they won't be fourth, they'll go straight to first. So I thought it's very balanced, and I agreed with the strategy as far as urging extremely strongly activists to go to their nearest twin seat and campaign there. And yes, the data are going to be imprecise and in some cases wrong. They always are, but you do the best you can. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. And in particular, I don't think they factored in a very high reform vote in quite a lot of the constituencies I looked at, which meant that the Conservatives lost to Labour because reform ate into their vote, and that may cause problems going forward. So I like the balance. I like the emphasis on members as volunteers who do not actually have to do anything. I feel like most of them do want to do something. They want to campaign. A lot of them want to campaign where they live. In council elections, we sometimes cannot get members to go up half a mile up the road to deliver leaflets in the next ward. They are not going to go to Kettering on a 3-hour trip. So what we were essentially telling them was, you want to help, but we can't give you anything to do at all. I know, for instance, that Cambridge, which is your area, did not even run a polling day operation. And the secretary mailed me absolutely distraught with members, some of them in their 80s, who are very happy to sit outside polling stations and collect numbers. And she had to tell them, sorry, we don't need you for this. There's nothing you can do to help Daniel Fleischner be re-elected as your MP. And I think that's absolutely disastrous because first, it's upsetting to them and lowers the allegiance to the party. But second, if you have the mayor up for Cambridge and Peterborough, all those votes in Cambridge that we didn't get are suddenly going to count. So I agree with urging that there are members who are, some of them work, they get home at 6 o'clock in the evening. They can do a few door-knocking sessions where they live. Some of them have seriously ill family members. Some of them have mobility issues, whether that's personal mobility or, as you say, complete lack of public transport. And if they can't do something, they won't go to Peterborough or they won't go to Banbury. They'll do nothing, and the next time we need them, they will also do nothing. I should say that in Oxfordshire we have a slightly different set of problems. There are 7 constituencies. Oxford East is Labour, analyse Dodds, and so we were kind of kept a bit of local stuff going, but basically we didn't care if people voted Green or Lib Dem or whatever. Oxford West is Lib Dem, Layla Moran, has been for a long time. Of the 5 other constituencies, 4 of them the Lib Dems took from the Tories, and we essentially gifted the Lib Dems those seats in return for them allowing us to take Banbury. which we did. That was all very effective. The only thing is we have county council elections in May, and the Lib Dems are actually our main opponents. They control the council, well, they run the councils, the minority administration now. But we are going to have to pivot from having them as implicit allies in getting the Tories out to our main opponent. And I haven't really seen anything of what the party is doing about that. And that's even before we start communicating with members. I could say quite a lot about elections, but perhaps that's a separate batch of questions to them.
Well, I'll tell you what. Shall we dive into some of that stuff first? Because I think there's a lot there to getting on with. So all I was going to say then. I'm going to play devil's advocate here mostly. So let's just try to go through some of these issues. Now, the members themselves as a body. That's an interesting thing to think about because on election day, I naughtily broke the rules and I went to Peterborough and I was there for the polling day where the result was incredibly tight at the end. And actually, I was quite shocked that I was told to go to Northampton South, I think it was. And actually, we won that quite comfortably. Whereas actually, instead, Peterborough, we won by about 100 well, you might know the numbers. Is it 118 votes or something? It's very, very tight.
It was something like that. It's one where one good polling session made the difference.
Yeah, I agree. And actually,
one good afternoon across the constituency would have found those votes.
Yeah, exactly. And this is exactly what happened on the day itself. I was kind of really feeling quite low going door to door, thinking, my word, this is far harder than I thought it was. And even about a month before in Peterborough, I thought it was easier. So I thought something's changed here. But the thing is, I knocked on the door of a Labour Party member, and he said to me, I wasn't that impressed with the Labour Party in this area. They've not been out on the doorsteps. And I said, well, I'm here now. I live just outside Cambridge and I've travelled up to your street. He said, I'm a Labour Party member too. I said, do you want to come with us then on your street? Because that's where we are. And he said, no, I'm cooking my dinner. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. I've been in Nottingham that morning. I'm now in Peterborough. I'm now going to my count that evening for my candidate. That member wouldn't even do their own street. So sometimes you talk about the members. Some members don't want to get involved, and that's also fine. They can, membership isn't about an expectation of what you must do. It's more like, the more the merrier. Be part of the party. Be at the meetings or whatever you can do is great. However, in this instance, I know that the local story is so important, and David and I face a Liberal Democrat opposition locally much more than we do a Conservative one at the moment. However, I think the argument would be, but if we hadn't have won that election, if we had been too spread out, and if surely the tough choices come in targeting that some areas you can't target, then surely we would maybe have lost that election. I mean, am I going too far in saying that? Are the polls saying that we would have won it anyway? Because I feel like one of the reasons it was such a huge success is by the targeting being quite that ruthless.
Can I jump in on that?
Go for it.
One of the people politically I find interesting is a guy from the States called Howard Dean. He ran for president and it ended infamously in the Dean screen. When he was chair of the Democratic National Convention or committee, he had this thing called a 50-state strategy, which was we're going to run in each state. We can't do that. We can't have a 650-seat strategy in the UK or whatever, whatever the number is out Northern Ireland. Although that's another issue. We can't do that. We are going to have to target, and there are always going to be people who are disappointed. I lived in Somerton and Frome constituency, which was never going to go Labour in a month of Sundays. I lived in cities of London and Westminster, which we thought would never go Labour, but now has. And Adam Hugg is now leader of the City of Westminster Council, which is just amazing. Now in Huntingdon, where we came close. And obviously it would be lovely to have a Labour MP and all the rest of it. But I know, unfortunately, Mum and Dad are not going to have a Labour MP down in the West Country where they live. I get that. But there's a difference between targeting and saying we're going to focus our resources on this and hampering people doing other things. Now, I think the assumption was that people would go to their target seats. I think that was the assumption. That assumption was faulty. And so, and you can't. It wasn't a case of people we want to campaign, so we'll go where's wanted. One of the things I say in the piece, which I I do believe, and I think I can back up, is that it actually would have reduced the amount of campaigning in twin seats. You mentioned party members. You also get volunteers. Um, you the candidate here, Alex Bulat, who's a member of the constituency, who I have a great deal of regard for. I think she's very impressive, and she had a lot of people who were not party members who wanted to campaign for her, not for the Labour Party, but for her. Now, some of those were willing to actually campaign for Labour, but they'd never done any campaigning before. So they'll come out and knock on doors in St Ives. But if you say, "Oh, we're not doing anything here, could you come to Peterborough?" They're not going to. But if you've been out a few times and you say, as a group, and you say, "Actually, we've been asked, can we give Andrew a hand up in Peterborough?" Then you might. And then if you get to the short campaign and you say, "Could you once a week, try to bring some people up to your twin seat, the people you're going campaigning with regularly," I think you might have actually had more campaign time. We had that. We certainly did that in Huntingdon just before our target was switched. I finally got a group of people to go up to Peterborough, and they were a few people who had started campaigning in this general election. As it happens, those were all members, but started campaigning in this general election. Once we'd been out a few times and they knew what they were doing, and you could give them, you could meet at the train station, take the train up. And obviously a few people drove themselves, and then get together and you're doing it as a group. That works, and I think that's something that's worth encouraging. So I take the point you're making that you've got to target. That is the reality. But I think maybe being a bit more clever about the targeting would help. There's also
I've never questioned that. It's and on which seats were chosen as targets, you're never going to get 100% whatever, because the data are never going to be complete.
Yeah.
So particular decisions with hindsight, in Havant, for instance, we lost by, I think, 24 votes. Havant would never have been on any list. And I'd also agree that central resources in the form of money, trade union support, paid organisers and so forth should not have been allocated to those seats. But when you actually prevent members in them from, I think it was somebody in the New Forest who said that they only have 3 members who will travel anywhere at all. So they might as well do something in the New Forest. By the way, on St Ives, I think it's worth pointing out that there's a St Ives in Cambridge. Which is
this is St Ives in Cambridge. Yeah,
I was just thinking that was a really extremely long journey. So I don't think the strategy. I would question the strategy. I would like to know why in the 2 Bournemouth seats, Bournemouth West was a target and got all the resources and all the paid organiser and everything. Bournemouth East got nothing except being told to campaign in Bournemouth West. And the swing in the 2 seats was identical, 15% to Labour, and we won both. I think I have them the right way around. You may want to check that. But anyway,
I think hindsight, though, is a great thing, because at the time, I imagine there must have been data to say that. There must have been data to say that one had a better chance for whatever reason. Obviously, I wouldn't know. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's just on the day it turns out that we're surprised that one swung as much the other way as well. I don't know. But I generally think the data is always going to be flawed, isn't it? You can only work with what you have, and you can only try to work on the polls and everything and work out how seats going to swing. And then on the day itself, there's always surprises, and you go, well, we never saw that coming. I guess that's part of it.
And that's one really good reason for people to be campaigning all year round, even in the seats where you think, blimey, this is hard work. If we can say next year we've got better data, and we've got the data to say, actually, we think Huntingdon is worth a shout, or wherever it happens to be, that helps. I mean, there's lots of other probably better reasons to be campaigning all year round, but getting that data into Contact Creator does help with that.
Is that part of the problem then? That do you think that the targeting was based on where the canvassing had been done for the previous few years, and so some of the seats which are not considered as likely to go Labour would have just had less data, meaning that we're kind of a little bit blind. We don't know until election day if we had a shot at winning them in the first place. What do you think about that, Anne?
I think there is one very good example, and that is Aldershot, which would, if the strategy as applied this year had been applied in previous general elections, Aldershot would not now have a Labour MP. There's a very small number of people who have worked away in Aldershot for the last 20 years, building up councillors on Rushmore Councillor to the point where they actually, Rushmore Council, where they actually, I think they took control of the council last May, and they were then given support. But 10, 15 years ago, there's no way Aldershot would have got a penny, and they wouldn't have a Labour MP now. So I do think, and again, it's down to local initiatives. And any local initiative should be encouraged, not hugely funded or anything, but at least not sort of dismissed.
David, were you going to say something on that as well?
Actually, I agree with Anne. It is those. Look, let's be honest. There are times when it's a wet Tuesday in February and you'd rather be in the pub than knocking on someone's door. The person whose door you're knocking on would probably also rather that you're in the pub. but it is kind of, it is important, and it does make that difference. And what you've said is, you know, the strategy to winning where you don't have an MP at the moment is it takes a long time and a lot of work. Is the reality. That's hard. That requires a lot of dedication. But I think that's, yeah, I'd agree with you.
It does, but can I just say another point that I think is important? This general election was a kind of once in a generation one, wasn't it? So I feel like this was the election which we had a chance of winning. Obviously we did, but I'm going back before the election now. The polls were in our favour. We had a Conservative Party who was in a mess. We had, I think, a Labour Party that still had a long way to go in terms of, you know, electoral victories. We probably thought like 5 years ago we weren't going to win this election. If, in all honesty, 2019, that December, if you remember the feeling the day after, I think a lot of us felt like this is a 10-year project to get back. So then we come into kind of 2023, 2024, and it's like, we can actually win this election. This is amazing. There's surely going to be a slightly different characteristic of this election whereby the feeling is, well, we don't want to mess this up. We've got to be ultra tight and ruthlessly target, because if we don't do that, then we could lose. And I guess the comparison would be 2019, where we had a massive vote share with votes piling up in safe Labour seats and not winning the seats we had to win. Whereas this time, we've got a much kind of broader coalition. And actually, David does talk about that in his article as well. A broader coalition now as a base in terms of the party support. But it has meant we can win successfully with a big majority. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it does seem that this election in particular would mean that our targeting would be different.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it was one we had to win. Because if to be honest, if we hadn't won this one, we might as well have packed up and gone home. One of the problems, you know, it's a long way until the next election, and we've got a lot of other things to talk about first. But it's going to be 4 or 5 really, really tough years. We all see this all the time, the condition the country is in, and getting that working ain't going to be easy. It's really not. We're already seeing that some of the decisions we've had to make. The number one issue we had when I was out on Saturday, on Sunday, sorry, was winter fuel payments. That was the top issue.
Cut through, hasn't it? For sure.
Yeah, it has. Interesting. I think there is confusion around that, because in the area where we were, I would assume that the majority of people would still qualify for them. So there is confusion around it, and that, you know, that may be assuaged this winter when people still get their payments. But, you know, there's going to be other things like that and other things people want, and that is going to.
Oh,
That
sorry,
is
Anne,
that
did you
is
want to say something on that as well?
Yes, it's ironic because the winter fuel allowance was introduced by Gordon Brown in a hurry and a panic after he had rigidly applied his rules for upgrading the state pension by inflation. And because inflation was only 1%, it was 75 pence a week extra. And that provoked the same kind of reaction that we're seeing now. And so he very hastily threw this, I think it was £100 lot with, he threw £100 at every single pensioner, whether they needed it or not, just to damp down the fuss. And I think the position of winter fuel allowance has always been a little ambiguous, and it would have been better dealt with as part of an overall review of tax and spend and welfare and pensions and all the rest of it, rather than sort of being on its own. But yes, there are going to be other political bumpy spells, and we do need to win, but we also need to be thinking about the next election. And that means we have a lot of very small majorities. We have a lot where, to be blunt, we benefited from reform being part of it, and we also have a large number of members who feel that they have been disrespected. And it's not so much what was actually done, it was that nobody ever communicated with members, with CLPs, with candidates about the overall strategy and the reasons for it, about selections, the reasons for delays, the reasons for doing it the way we did, and all the rest of it. And if people are members, we're a very forgiving bunch. If people explain things to us, we tend to say, oh, yes, we had to win those by-elections, so we understood that took priority. But why the occasional email to every CLP and every candidate saying, this is where we tend to get to, this is why, unfortunately, other things have come along, we'll be back to you as soon as we have a better schedule. So it's exactly what David said. I think the best thing he said in his article was just be nicer to people. And I'm hoping the new General Secretary will do that.
I mean, I agree. I kept getting people. I was the procedure secretary for the general election. In the end, we didn't need me because we had a candidate appointed. I had lots of people getting, saying, what are you doing? What's happening? Are we going to have a hustings? And I kept having to say, I don't know, and I don't even know if we're going to be told. So, and that was annoying. There was also, and this will sound, I know, very very minor, but there's also just a practical thing of, like, in the end, we didn't have a selection. Some selections were being organised at really quite short notice. There is just a practical thing of finding a hall sometimes to do it. If you say the selection is going to be on a Thursday night, well, the place where Huntingdon CLP usually meets is being used for Zumba, and so I'd be calling around, and it's just little things like give people a little bit more notice. I think the be nicer point is, well, that is a key thing for me. I really shouldn't have been calling up the deputy leader of our group on the district council to say, have you heard you haven't been selected as the MP? It shouldn't have been me. Fortunately, I'd happened to speak to someone else previously who I'd called up to commiserate with, and and that was how he found out. That's okay, I get things are busy. I get things are a high pressure situation, but somebody could have sent an email, picked up the phone saying, look, really sorry, this is what's happened and why. This does lead on to another thing about the expectations of candidates during elections, which I have issues with. Being a candidate is hard. Being a candidate in a non-target seat, yes, you are going to be spending time in other seats. That is correct. But I think the amount, the changes in what was expected and the manner of it was concerning. I'll just do just one last thing on this. We lost in, and I know this is special pleading for the place where I happen to live. I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to. We lost by 1,499 votes. If we'd selected 6 months earlier and had still had no support from the CLP, from the party nationally, or from the regional office, I don't know. Could we have found 1,500 votes in 6 months? I don't know, but it would have been nice to have had a go. So the that was frustrating. But yeah, I think the be nicer point is an important one, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, that, isn't it? I think, okay, so there's several issues in this article, isn't there? And the selections one, I think, is an interesting one, because the way the election fell, and then when the selections happened, it all kind of crunched together at the last minute, didn't it? And I think it was a bit of a shame that we didn't have a slightly longer run up so that people could work together. But what I would say is big sort of praise here to Stevenage, to not only to Kevin Bonovia and of course to Sharon Taylor, but all the councillors who came to our fundraising event when we ran it between East Cambs, South Cambs and St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire. They came up because they're twinned with South Cambs, and they said, well, we see this is a two-way relationship. And I think actually there's something really positive there, whereby battleground seats and non-battleground seats get to know each other a little bit and feel like they partake in each other's environment. And helping with fundraising was a great thing, and they came up to in fact Sharon ran the raffle for us. It was a really lovely evening. And then of course it also meant that they got to meet people in the room to say, please come to Stevenage, we're doing a campaign day on this Saturday, whenever the date is. And then that meant people felt like, oh, I'm going to help Kevin, I know him, I've met him, he's come to my area. So I think with time, and the battleground seat thing is a great idea, and I think there's something definitely to be said for that kind of friendship interconnection between areas. Because when Stevenage won, I never went to Stevenage to campaign. I was in Peterborough the whole time, where I was supposed to be, but I remember thinking, yes, they've won, I know those people, I feel like I'm part of that victory, because from afar I'd had something to do with them, which is wonderful.
But I agree. It's you're more likely to go and campaign for David or Anne or Dan than some randomer. And if you've had a fundraiser, it's interesting to mention Stevenage. When we were this was some time ago, when we were trying to get the old Huntingdon constituency going. They sent a few people up to give us a hand and like just come and do some events. And it's like, okay, look, come on, we will take you out canvassing, which was really nice of them. And sort of show people who the difference in having a councillor who'll come out and say, okay, don't worry, I've done this, come around and watch a few with me, makes a huge difference. That was really helpful.
Could I just add one thing? I don't think the party really pushed telephone canvassing enough, because I actually did more phoning through dialogue in Banbury than I did on the Banbury doorsteps. If you're on the doorsteps for a couple of hours, you might only talk to 8 voters. But if you're sitting on your own sofa with a phone and dialogue up, it just goes sit, number unobtainable, no answer, on to the next one. And you can just go through 50 or 60 just like that. And it's something that can be done on a collective basis, and you can get people together in somebody's home if they use mobiles or whatever, or and then do something sociable afterwards. So it's a way of building little networks locally where people can do something and encourage each other and get out the vote. I think we kind of, you've only really earned your spurs if you've worn through 6 pairs of shoes on the campaign trail. Could I just add one thing that you may want to check? Tom Hayes is actually the MP for Bournemouth East, and Jessica Toll is the MP for Bournemouth West. So if I got that wrong, you may just want to take out Bournemouth.
Okay, no problem at all, Anne. Just want to say though, last point on this part, and then we'll move to something slightly different. But I just want to come back to, I personally have a difference of opinion to you both when it comes to the targeting. And what I mean by that, I know you both agree we had to do targeting. I know that completely. I was somebody who wasn't selected. I'm in an area which was non-battleground, so I feel the pain of that. And it's not like I was in a whizzy seat like, Peterborough or Stevenage. But at the same time, I am so overjoyed that there's a Labour government, and my fear was we wouldn't have one. And that fear, and let's be honest, we've been there before. 92 was a good example of this, where basically we were talking about we were going to win and we didn't. 2017, we had a good result, but we still lost. And it's that feeling of, why did this happen? 2015, again, we didn't win. Isn't it better overall that we've got a Labour government? Doesn't that kind of heal a lot of this feeling? Because actually now it's like, the childbirth of that election was painful, but now we've got the actual election result. Now we can kind of be joyous and unite again around that kind of victory. I'll come to you first, Anne.
I think it creates a climate in which relationships that were damaged can be rebuilt. And I have seen some pretty offensive emails sent to CLP officers in particular, and especially when they were disconnected from Campaign Creator, which parties actually, CLPs have a rulebook entitlement to use Contact Creator. It was agreed in 2011. So it's arguably against the rules to withdraw it, but even to organise. And they just got disconnected without warning. They were upset, justifiably in my view, but having an overall victory means that the next few months is the ideal opportunity to go in and rebuild some of those relationships in the region and also nationally. And it will be, unless we do that fairly soon, then we'll be storing up disgruntlement for next time. And next time will not be easy either. 4% swing and we're out.
Wow, yeah. David, what do you think about that?
So it's difficult. These are not difficult calls for the party to make. It's not easy, and we shouldn't pretend it's easy. And I know it's what is quite easy is for me to sit here and pontificate and sort of say you should do things that I want. We all agree on targeting. I think the what I'd say is that we could have done targeting in a way that was still had the same aim, but tweaking what our expectations of members were that would have been more effective. That wouldn't have damaged how effectively we were targeting, and wouldn't have stored up some of the problems we've got for the future. And I'm going to go back to the if you don't mind, to the barking point I made earlier on. My it's a bit of an obsession because my doctoral research was on opposition to the far right. My case studies was Barking and Dagenham. One of the things that came out was people felt that, look, it's a complicated situation. There is no one reason why people vote in any direction, let alone the far right. But part of it was that people didn't see political parties, and didn't see political parties. When they did, it was on the telly. It wasn't the local councillor. One of the things in different ways that the MPs and the parties did there was really go out and reconnect with people. Dame Margaret Hodge, or in fact she's now Baroness Hodge, but did a series of quite extensive series of coffee mornings, and I think just the effect of meeting your MP, and also Margaret Hodge is really quite an impressive person as well, and she's quite good fun. That actually has a real difference. One of the things that people say is we didn't see it. We only see you at election time. We didn't see you, or during the election, we didn't see you at all. And one of the things we will hear is you didn't do much at the general election, so you don't care about this area, so I'm not going to vote for you at the locals. So you put those together, and I think we may be opening ourselves up for a problem for next time. I am really worried about reform. I think there's still a possibility that Nigel Farage will be Nigel Farage and it will burn out. But I think there is still the people voted for reform for lots of reasons, but that dissatisfaction with the political system is there, coupled with the economic concerns we have, the condition of the country. we have, as a party, as a responsibility to deal with that. Now, the best way of dealing with that, the best way for a political party to deal with that is to be in power. Power in Westminster, but also power in local councils and so on. But it's also being a good political party, and that means being out there and being visible. And even if sometimes that you have to have that really difficult conversation and say, there ain't no money, or I can't do this, or we can't do this, or that's, it should happen, but realistically it's not going to. That's not much fun, but I think it's important, and I think is part of the campaign against the far right. So I'm not calling for a massive overhaul of how the campaign was run, but there are some tweaks that I think could and should have been made, which would have been helpful. I'm just going to disagree with Anne on one thing, or sort of not quite disagree. I said 4% swing. It's 4% uniform swing. The swing this time really wasn't uniform, and there was a lot of tactical voting. So, and this is one of the points. There are seats that we hold now which we should not target, and there are seats that we don't hold that we should target. And I'm not necessarily including in hunting that in that. The other thing is that people are moving around. There are places are growing and so on. So unfortunately, there are some MPs where we're going to have to say, look, really sorry, we're not going to be able to give you much help here. And there are some places where we're going to have to go hell for leather because the situation will change, and that's going to be tough. That's not easy to do. To say to someone, you've been an MP for 4 or 5 years, but we think the resources are better spent elsewhere. But I think we may have to do that.
That's easier said than done, though, because if that person is a junior minister or something, that's hard conversation to have, isn't it? Or has got a portfolio of sorts. Is there anything you want to add to this, Anne, as we wrap up this part of our conversation?
I don't disagree with David. There are some. Next to the two Bournemouths, there's Poole, which we never expected to win in a million years, and but I think those will be the kinds of decisions that. We at least one of the many advantages of electing a Labour government is that we get to choose the date of the next election. So we do not have to start working out which MPs we have those conversations with for 3 years at least. So I think we should encourage them all to do all they can as part of a Labour government, and then in 3 years we'll think about getting around that. This is not one of the problems that keeps me awake yet.
Love that.
Are you going to talk about selections, Dan?
Yes, we did mention that they were fairly late, didn't we? Do you want to add to that at all, Anne?
Yeah, I think selections is one of the things David covered less of because it was really kept pretty internal. One of the legitimate reasons for delay was the boundary review, so that we didn't actually know until July last year for certain where the boundaries would be. We already had 200 sitting MPs and quite a few selected for battleground seats. And when boundaries changed, they had to be shuffled around. If every seat had or most seats had selected candidates, then the shuffling would have become even more difficult. So I think that was a legitimate reason for delay and should have been explained. We then advertised for expressions of interest in the non-battleground seats in July 2023, and then nothing happened until through September. And that was because there was a string of by-elections, Wellingborough, I forget the names of them, but there was one after the other. And those took priority. They had to take priority. They were must-win by-elections. But what it means is that all party staff who would oversee elections were in by-election seats instead.
Yes, Mid-Bedfordshire, Wellingborough, Kettering, yeah.
Yeah, you could have sent an email to CLP secretaries and all the people who expressed interest saying, by-elections, priorities, thank you for expressing an interest. We'll get back to you soon with an update and say CLPs. And then a further call in November for applications by January. In January, at the end of January, panels of 2 NEC and 1 regional executive member met to select shortlists for those non-battleground seats, the 211 of them by that date. I was on a panel for some of those. We had, for 3 of them, we had 48 hours to read over 300 applications. And then we had an hour per region to allocate shortlists. We were also told that because of lack of capacity, most of those would be single candidate impositions. And I think that is another thing that fed into CLPs, because this is the 3rd election in succession where many of them have not been able to choose their own candidates. 2017, I would defend to the hilt. I was on the NEC then, and we literally had 12 days to find 631 candidates. 2019, I was up for the NEC. I think there should have been more time for that because the election wasn't entirely unexpected. This time, there is no reason why more CLPs should not have had a choice. The NEC guidance was that a single person could be imposed if there were no other qualified candidates. I do not believe that in all those seats there were no other qualified candidates other than the one that was allocated. And interestingly, there seemed to be a desire to have not only gender balance, but also good representation of BAME, disabled, LGBT plus candidates, which in some ways is a bit odd because these are seats we were not planning to win. So why are we improving the demographics for seats we're not going to win? And it seemed to me at the time that the aim was to create a cohort of candidates for the next election who would be experienced and decide if they liked it, on with canvassing and so on, and they would then be in train to produce a more diverse cohort next time. So anyway, that was the end of January. The intention was for that to become known within a couple of weeks. But then the Rochdale by-election happened, our candidate imploded, and the party frantically started doing more extensive due diligence checks on everybody shortlisted for everywhere, and that meant some candidates were removed and panels were asked to approve changes. I should say that because of the short timescale for all of this, we relied very heavily on recommendations from regional directors for shortlists for all the 211 seats because they'd had the time, they knew all the people and so on. So although these were formally signed off by NEC panels, a lot of the influence over that decision came through regional directors. So anyway, Rochdale caused another delay. And again, if an email had gone out to members and candidates saying, you'll have read about Rochdale, you'll understand that we can't afford any more mistakes and we do need to be extra careful to put forward high quality candidates. I think that would have been understood. And then people wouldn't have been phoning me or phoning the secretary or the procedure secretary every 2 weeks saying I haven't heard anything yet. So that was delayed really right up until the last minute, and that was unfortunate. There was also some dissatisfaction with shortlisting for the battleground seats. So I don't know if you want to go back that far, because the NEC drew up long lists for those, and sometimes local parties felt that people were excluded who were good local people, and they didn't know why they had not been included, and they cannot find out. And the final point I'd make is that if any candidate is excluded for due diligence issues, whatever they are, that candidate should be informed or have the right to be informed of what they are, because that affects their political future as a parliamentary candidate, as a councillor, as a CLP officer at every level. And so there are people who were passed over and they still do not know why. And I think that's the final bit of work that I would put into rebuilding going forward. Sorry, that's a bit long, but it's
very good. No, it's a
long
unique insight.
story.
It really is.
A lot of it is behind the scenes. So all that people knew out there was that nothing was happening, and we don't know why.
Yeah. No, thank you, Anne. That was amazing. Well, thank you both for coming on today to talk about the article. I'm actually going to leave a link to that in the show notes. So if you do want to go and read that for yourself, if you haven't already, please feel free to do so. And now I'm going to have a slight change of gear. So David has now left us. It's only Anne Black and I. And I've just given Anne a little opportunity to talk about her in particular because, of course, she is standing for the NEC at the moment. So, Anne, it's just the two of us now. I've got a few questions, if you don't mind answering them, so that our listeners can just get to know you a bit better, apart from your wonderful emails. And it's a bit more like light-hearted. So the first one is, why are you Labour?
Well, I actually joined the Labour Party in the 1980s, and it was Margaret Thatcher who recruited me. Up until then, I'd always been on the left. I grew up in a Guardian reading household. I was even, dare I say, as a young Liberal when I was in my teens. But on the whole, there wasn't as much difference in those days between Ted Heath and James Callaghan as there is between the parties now. I voted Labour from the time I could vote, but there didn't. See, it wasn't a disaster if the other lot got in. With Margaret Thatcher, it became clear that I became very clear about all the things that I was against, all the things she was doing in terms of industrial relations, the economy, and so on. So I joined the Labour Party. I also had an opportunity because my next door neighbour won, who had a cat, and we fed each other's cats, was standing for the council and asked if I'd deliver some leaflets. So it's the two things: it's being in the right frame of mind, and then a particular opportunity comes up when someone asks you to do something. And I've stayed for more than 40 years now because, all things being equal, the Labour Party's values are closest to mine. From each according to their means, to each according to their needs, which is what Labour ought to stand for, in my view. And it's also most likely to be able to put those into practice. There are other parties where I might like particular things, but they're never going to be in government. And we need a party which can not only have the right principles, but be in a position to implement them, which very fortunately we are at the moment.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Right, so the next one is, what was your best day in politics and why?
Well, I think it was one of the most exciting days. That was in 2010, after we lost the election, and we were holding a leadership election. And it is very refreshing for the first NEC meeting after the general election not to agree the rules for electing a new leader for a change. But we had pretty clearly four candidates from the beginning: Ed Balls, Andy Burnham, Ed Miliband, David Miliband. And it was a very undiverse pool of applicants: white men in their 40s, shadow cabinet people, and myself and Tony Lloyd, who sadly died earlier, thought it would be good to have a more diverse choice. So Diane Abbott was interested in standing, and she got the nominations from the campaign group, which was not enough. But Tony and I wrote a joint letter to MPs saying, I was chair of the NEC that year, saying that we thought it would be a good thing to have a diverse range of candidates, gender-wise, vein-wise, and policy-wise. So he did quite a bit, and I did a bit to encourage Labour MPs to nominate her. And she ended up squeaking over the threshold when David Miliband, though a candidate himself, nominated Diane Abbott to broaden the debate. I was sitting in, I think it was Ray Collins as General Secretary, and that's going back a bit, in the General Secretary's office as the strokes of Big Ben chimed, and we were waiting for the nominations to come through. And when it was announced that Diane Abbott was on the ballot, I thought, wonderful. We had a really good summer of hustings. Diane Abbott clearly wasn't expecting to win, but she had a lot of fun. So that was one of my more memorable days. But there's a part 2 to that, which John O'Farrell has picked up as well. And that is the idea of nominating, for MPs to nominate a candidate that they do not support, do not think will be a good leader, and would never vote for, got kind of embedded in their minds through to 2015.
And we know what happened then.
Then, of course, the strokes of Big Ben at midday was Jeremy Corbyn just squeaked over the deadline, but some of the people who nominated him, Margaret Beckett and I think Emily Thornberry, I don't want to libel anyone.
Dawn Butler did, yeah.
Yes, quite a few people nominated him, and I think the seed of the idea that you nominate somebody just to broaden the debate and make things more interesting is one that was sown in 2010. And looking back again, was that good or inevitable? So it's an interesting thing to follow through, but it was certainly, I felt that history could have been different.
Yeah. Okay. So next one then,
radio. Good. I mean, if
I was going to say,
Corbyn
significant. Yeah.
If Jeremy Corbyn had not been elected, I asked my mailing list. I said, well, if not Jeremy Corbyn, who else do you think could be leader? And the most common answer was none of the above. And few people, interestingly, said Keir Starmer. And this was back in 2015, when he'd been an MP for about 10 minutes. And there were people already saying Keir Starmer could be leader. So
you know what? I think leadership itself, leadership forms the leader. So what I mean by that is, I think Andy Burnham, as mayor, has formed into the leader that he was always going to be. And I suspect if he was leader of the party in 2015, he would have been a fantastic leader of the opposition and maybe prime minister now. I think Yvette Cooper the same. I think she was somebody who would have been formed as a leader by the office of leadership, and I think she's a superb Home Secretary.
Yes, Andy Burnham doesn't believe in having a party whip.
Does he not? I didn't know that. Wow.
No, I've been on.
Okay.
He supports electoral reform, proportional representation. One of the things he thinks is that there shouldn't be a party whip, and people should use their own judgment. And
right, I'm going to have words with him because I support the whip personally, and I also
while the whip can be excessively stringently applied, I think if there was no whip at all, and we had 400 and something Labour MPs thinking everything through, I'm not sure that would be effective.
But also, they're Labour MPs, so we're a team, aren't we? It's a team sport, and we are trying to achieve things which we set out in our manifesto, and it's actually undemocratic to stand for election to get elected as a Labour MP and then go against the manifesto, for instance, because you personally don't agree with something. That's surely far less democratic than representing what the party was elected on and what got you your seat. That's what I would say.
Yes, but not everything is in the manifesto without going back to winter fuel allowance. But
yes,
maybe you can
true.
ask Andy Burnham that next time you interview him.
I want him on. Right, Andy, here's a challenge. Please come on to the show. Okay, last question then, of the light-hearted ones, and that is, if Radio 4 called you and said, can you come onto the show, which song would you like to choose to take with you? And I will add this to our Spotify playlist.
Okay, Bob Dylan, Mr. Tambourine Man, because it reminds me of my lost
classic.
youth.
I love that. That's a classic
It's not
song.
political.
No, these questions, yeah, that one never is political for people. I've had Thangam Debonair on, and she was talking about these pieces of music I'd never even heard of before. So, but I have heard of that one, so that's fantastic. And finally, Anne, because of course the NEC elections are currently ongoing, would you like to just say a few words now about why you recommend people vote for you?
Okay, so I've been a member of the NEC for 22 years, 10 of them in government, 12 in opposition. I know that government is always better because if you can persuade ministers to take a particular direction, then they can actually put it into action, not just talk about it. I'm hardworking, I'm experienced, I'm accountable. I've reported on over 200 meetings. They're all on my website at www.anneblack.com, which I'm sure you can put a link to it in the transcript. I am loyal to Keir Starmer and the Labour government, and I very much hope that we succeed after so long out of power. But I'm also independent. When I was first elected in 2000, I was part of the hard left slate along with Dennis Skinner and Mark Seddon. By 2018, I'd somehow turned into a Blairite traitor, and that led to me losing my seat in 2018. And I came back in 2020 when the electoral system was changed to single transferable vote, which meant that independents stood a chance, and the constituency parties have diverse NEC representatives, which is the way it should be, and why I support electoral reforms. So, throughout that time, my principles have changed the same. I mean, I haven't changed from being hard left, being a Blairite traitor. My principles have always been the same, from each according to their means, to each according to their needs. And every member matters. And what I've tried to do is maintain contacts with members. I have a mailing list of several thousands that I mail directly. I also tweet, although I think I'm going to have to leave X, Twitter, because it's just become a very unpleasant place in terms of its owner primarily. But while I've been supported by different groups from time to time, I'm not in the gift of any faction. On every issue, I consult members if I've got time. I listen to the arguments on both sides, and I decide according to their merit. And if I'm re-elected, that is what I will continue to do. And if anyone would like to mail me with a question before the election closes, then I'm at anneblack50@btinternet.com. Always happy to hear from you.
Fantastic. I just want to say, Anne, you're somebody who I hadn't met until today, although I'd known your name for many years, because actually at CLP meetings, quite often your email was the one that was read out. It was shared to members of the exec, and it was shared to members. And you really do communicate so thoroughly with party members, and that is admirable. So thank you for those years of service. And it must be tough sometimes handling all that.
It hasn't.
Please do.
My reporting has not always been popular with the powers that be. But I try to keep a very fine line, and everything I write, I try to give an impression of what was discussed. I never quote individuals by name, so you'll not find me naming particular NEC members unless I'm sure that they will want to be like kind sponsors, Keir Starmer gives or whatever. And I always think about, could this end up in the headlines, the Daily Mail or the Express, and be used against us? And there have been 2 or 3 times, I think once on the party funding issues, but I've very rarely featured in the hostile mainstream and social media, and I intend to keep it that way while giving members as much information as I can.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for coming on the show today, Anne. It's been fantastic to talk to you, and good luck in the up-and-coming election.
Okay, thank you very much. Good talking to you as well.
This wound, this lack of trust, can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that. But we can make a start today with the simple acknowledgement that public service is a privilege and that your government should treat every single person in this country with respect.